Okay, guys, so morning year 10. I thought we'd do it a little bit differently today. What I'm going to try and do for our lessons from now on is I'm going to try and make you a little video just to try and sort of help explain certain concepts to you, just so it's not just you having to read things and write them down, because I appreciate that does get a little bit dry. So, as you would have gathered from the documentary that I got you to watch last week, we are now at the point in our GCSE course where we are going to be starting the third module. So we've already done Germany, spent a long time looking at Germany and kind of how the Nazis took over and so on. We then obviously have done the Cold War, and we've done the entire Cold War from 1941 all the way up to 1991. And our third unit that we're going to be studying is a little bit different. So it's not modern history. We're jumping back about sort of 400-500 years, and we are going to learn about Elizabeth I and the Elizabethans, the Tudor period. So the first task I'm going to ask you to do, and hopefully thanks to the documentary, you should have a fair bit to say, is I'm going to ask you just to spider diagram in your books what you already know about Elizabeth, because she is a pretty famous monarch. She was voted fairly recently in a sort of poll by the BBC, one of the top Britons to ever have lived. You know, she's a really famous figure, really often renowned as one of our greatest monarchs. So you may already know a few things about her. So the first thing I want you to do is just a spider diagram in your book what you already know about Queen Elizabeth I. And then when you're ready, start the video again and we'll talk through it. Okay, so as I say, having watched that documentary, you probably have a fair old bit to say about this, and this is something hopefully I think a lot of you will have known about already. As I say, Elizabeth is a really, really famous English hero, really. So Elizabeth is Henry VIII's daughter. We all know Henry VIII, big, fat, scary man. He likes to chop off people's heads. She is the daughter of him and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, which is going to be really, really important in this course, because Henry's actions and the way in which kind of him and Elizabeth's mother got together is obviously really, really important for how it changes England. Because Henry has to get a divorce from his first wife in order to do that, which, as you will remember from year 7, involves him breaking from the Catholic Church, which becomes kind of a big deal. She's born in 1533. After Henry has broken from Rome in order to marry her, and then Anne Boleyn, very disappointingly, gives birth to a girl, because Henry wanted a son. That was what he wanted. He wanted to have an heir. So when a girl came out, he was a little bit miffed. For reasons sort of related to that, but also for various other reasons, within a couple of years, when Elizabeth's only about 3 years old, her mum is executed, as again you'll remember from the documentary. So she doesn't become queen for quite a long time after that. She has 2 half-siblings who get in there first, one of whom is Edward VI, who's only a very little boy when he rules. He dies when he's only a sort of early teenager, only just a little bit older than you, so he's only a child. He is Protestant, and then her sister, her half-sister Mary, is a Catholic, and we'll talk about more on her in just a second. So if we just have a look at the family tree, this is the Tudors, the most famous family in English history. I think I've heard them described before as the Kardashians of English history. All right, they're a very, very famous family, lots of drama, lots of excitement. So when you're studying history, I think it's pretty good to have a look at some Tudors. So the first Tudor is Henry VII. Here he is. He won the Battle of Bosworth at the end of the Wars of the Roses and took over. There's Liz's dad, Henry VIII, very, very, very famous king. Okay, that is his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess with whom he had Mary. She was a Catholic. Got fed up with her, she got a bit old, got a bit fat, wasn't having any children anymore, wasn't having any boys, so Henry gave her the boot and married young, sexy Anne Boleyn, with whom he had Elizabeth. In order to do that, he had to break with Rome and fall out with the Pope in order to get that divorce, and it turned England into a Protestant country, which obviously led to a lot of problems later on. So he then gets fed up with Anne Boleyn, as I said, within a few years. She gets her head chopped off. New wife, and Jane Seymour, and she produces this little boy here, Edward VI, who we've already mentioned, and then Henry has a variety of other wives who follow after that, but there are no kids with them. So these are the ones we're most interested in. These are the ones we are mostly going to be talking about, primarily, of course, Liz, who is our key figure. So Elizabeth's sister Mary is pretty important to kind of set the tone for this course, and we're going to talk about her a little bit more in a later lesson. All right, she is often known as Bloody Mary. Now, That's not an entirely fair description for reasons that we won't go into, but she was renowned for being a really, really devoted Catholic, to the extent that she had quite a nasty habit of burning Protestants alive at the stake, at least 300, and she was only queen for a couple of years. So she really got quite busy with the Protestant burning, which is why she's known as Bloody Mary. Um, Elizabeth, during that time, again, you'll remember this from the documentary, at one stage Mary puts her in prison. She locks her in the Tower of London because she accuses Elizabeth of having been plotting against her. Conveniently, though, Mary then dies. She doesn't have any kids, and that allows Elizabeth to then take to the throne. Now, funnily enough, later on in Elizabeth's reign, she ends up going to war with Mary's husband Philip, who was the King of Spain. Okay, most famously ending in the invasion of the Spanish Armada in 1588, which is kind of the big event of our course that we're building up to, where England, this sort of plucky underdog, is able to win against this enormous Spanish superpower, thanks to people like Sir Francis Drake and so on. Elizabeth's reign sees the beginning of the British Empire, so we have lots of exploration, going to America and places like that, or what we would now call America. They called it the New World. And it's also a period where we see a kind of a golden age of lots of cultural things going on, such as, for instance, Shakespeare, who I'm sure you guys will have studied in English. So what we're going to be looking at in our course as we look at Elizabeth's reign, this is one that I think a lot of people think, oh, I might not enjoy this, I like modern history, but it is just that little bit different. I think it's really exciting, so give it a chance and hopefully you're going to enjoy it. So the things we're going to look at, we're going to start off by looking a little bit about how Elizabethan England worked. So how was it structured? What was it like to live in? How did it run? All those kind of things. It's a very different period. We're looking, half a thousand years ago, long time. So it's very different to our world today. So it's quite interesting to look at how things worked in England all that time ago. We have a look at religious conflict. As I said, all of that drama with Henry breaking from Rome and Protestants versus Catholics, that becomes a big deal during this course, and it's kind of at the bottom of all of the drama that happens. We're going to look at Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's sort of second cousin, who you may have heard of. She plots to kill Elizabeth for about 20 years. She never learns her lesson. So we're going to find out about that, which is, again, it's quite exciting. We're going to look at what happens with Spain. Okay, so how does it all go wrong? And you can see here, this is a map of the New World. Okay, this is a bit called Virginia. It's not the state of Virginia these days. It's in a slightly different place, but it's what we call Carolina. But how was all that discovery down in the New World, in what we would now think of as America, fighting with Spain? What went on there? Have a look at education. So what was it like to go to school in Elizabethan times? What did they do for fun? We're going to look at how they dealt with poor people as well, because that was quite a big deal during this period. So lots to get through. We'll be doing this up until summer, definitely, and probably a little bit after as well. But it is a really exciting course. There's loads of great, juicy bits of drama in there. Lots of excitement, murder, fighting, all the kind of things we enjoy. So hopefully you are going to enjoy it. So, as I say, what we do today is we're going to start off by just getting a bit of a background as to how Elizabethan society worked. Okay, so who are the different people in society? How is society structured? And how does that kind of set the scene, the backdrop for all of these important events that we're going to learn about? So we've got two key words. Okay, I'm going to ask you to write these down in your book. Okay, the first one is hierarchy. Now, this is a word you've probably heard of before, but just to be clear, what a hierarchy is basically it's a way of ranking. Okay, so if you think the hierarchy at our school would be Mr. Reeve at the top, and then the deputy heads underneath, Mr. Gunn, Mr. Lord, then the assistant heads, Mr. Griffiths, etc., all the way down to, I'm afraid, you guys at the bottom. That's a hierarchy, and you'll remember from year 7, you did the bit of work on the feudal system, which is the hierarchy of medieval England. So we're going to have a look at the hierarchy of Tudor England for this course. Okay, so that is what a hierarchy means. You need to make sure you get that written down. Our second keyword is social contract. Now, this is kind of an idea. It's not an actual bit of paper that people had to sign, but basically it's kind of a belief as to how society needs to work. And effectively, it's the people that are higher up in society, they have to care for the people below them. So if you're a rich person, you need to look after poor people if they're having a rough time. And similarly, if you're a poor person, you've got to respect the rich people because they're above you. All right, so you've got to respect the people above you and look after the people below you. Okay, and that's kind of how Elizabethan society worked. All right, as you'll see in a minute, it's quite different to the way our world works now. There's no moving around or getting to kind of do better and achieve your goals. If you're born poor, you're probably stuck staying poor. All right, and you've got to make sure you fulfill your role in society that is appropriate. So if you just want to pause the video and just get those keywords down, I have attached the PowerPoint to show my homework if that's easier, but just get these definitions into your book. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at a couple of the sources and try and see what we can figure out about how Elizabethan society worked. So this is our first picture. Okay, I'd like you to have a little look at it, try and make some sense of it, and in your book, I would like you to jot down a couple of bullet points in answer to this question. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video in a minute. I say jot down a couple of ideas as to what you think this picture can tell us, and then start the video up again, and I'll talk you through it. Okay, so pause the video, think about what this picture can tell us about how Elizabethan society looked, and then we'll talk about it together. Okay? Okay, so hopefully you've all come up with some ideas. So I'm just going to talk you through just a little bit of the kind of things you might have said, and hopefully you can maybe add to your notes with anything you've missed. So what's the key thing we can see here? Well, we seem to have a pretty nicely dressed. I mean, not my exact fashion sense, but certainly at the time, this would have been very fashionably dressed figure. Okay, looks like he's got a fair bit of money. He's walking through what appears to be the countryside, and there's this poor guy. He's got a bandaged leg. His clothes are all ripped. He looks a bit sad. And this guy's just kind of walking past him with his hand out, not really seeming to do a huge amount. So, what can this tell us? Well, first of all, it can tell us there's a lot of inequality. Okay, there's a big difference between rich people and poor people. Okay, this guy clearly is having a lovely time. He's got jewels, he's got incredibly expensive clothing. Obviously, this is in black and white, but you can imagine it's going to be bright colours, it's going to be gold thread, he's going to be really sort of dressed to impress. And then you've got this poor guy, this beggar, who is, wearing torn clothes and really, really suffering. So that's one thing we can tell about society. It's really unequal. All right, there's real difference between rich and poor. Now, the next one, this is kind of down to interpretation, so you can kind of imagine what's going on here. We can see this in two ways. We can either assume, okay, look, this rich guy is just walking past, he's not even looking at him, he's not doing anything, so we can assume that maybe the rich people didn't care about the poor people. But perhaps if we look a little bit closer, we can come up with a slightly better interpretation, which is, look, he's holding his hand out. Okay, so remember what I told you about that social contract, the idea that you have to care for the people below you? Perhaps what we're suggesting here is that the rich people felt it was their responsibility to help the poor. Okay, so there may be a big divide, there may be a lot of inequality, but this rich figure does appear to be helping the poor. Okay, let's look a little bit more detail. So the poor, he seems to be living in quite a sort of horrible little shack, got a thatched roof. He's out in the countryside, so we can assume that probably a lot of England was countryside at this time. There isn't a lot of towns and cities the way there are now, but if you look in the background, there is a sort of castle-y type thing. So perhaps there were some towns, but most of the country is countryside, which means that most people are going to be doing what? Farming. Most people are probably going to be farmers. A few more images here. So you can see this is the court of Elizabeth. You can see again that you can see the kind of clothes they're wearing. Huge amounts of money here, money, prestige. There's a dead crocodile hanging from the ceiling for some reason, probably just to show off where they've been. Meanwhile, over here we've got another vagrant. So a vagrant is another word for a homeless person that moves around. Okay, so again, we can really see that divide, that real inequality between wealthy people and poorer people. Okay, next source. So this source is called the Great Chain of Being. Okay, and that's what this is supposedly showing. So same situation. I'd like you to pause this video, have a look at the image, try and have a think about perhaps what it tells us about how Elizabethan society worked. And then when you're ready, start the video up again and we'll talk about it together. Okay, so this is, we talked about a hierarchy. Obviously, this is not actually a real thing that existed. You didn't look around, there was a big chain floating up to the sky. Obviously this is not something you could walk around, wander down the road and just see this. This is not meant to be a literal image, it's a metaphor of how society worked. And it just shows that hierarchy. Okay, so let's break this down. At the top, we've got God. All right, there he is. There's Jesus, sort of reclining on him. There's God, got his crown on, looking pretty important. Okay, under him, we've got the angels. You can see them all sort of surrounding God. And then the next rank down, this is where it gets interesting. Okay, so this is the top rank down after God and the angels. Drum roll, drum roll, drum roll. It's monarchs, it's kings, it's queens. Okay, so kings and queens are seen to be pretty much a few rungs down from God. Okay, and if you look, they've got a direct link to God. Now that ties into this idea that you may remember from when you studied the Civil War of the divine right of kings. This idea that monarchs, kings and queens, they have been chosen by God and therefore they can do whatever they like. Okay, and you can see that idea is really shown here, that they are somehow much more connected to God, much more important than commoners, who are the next rung down. Okay, we've then got animals, we've then got plants. You can see some animals there, there's the plants. Down here we've got minerals, so rocks, right at the bottom of the chain. And then at the very bottom, obviously down here, we've got the devil and we've got hell. Okay, so what does this image then tell us about society? Well, it really reinforces this idea that it was very much a hierarchy. It was hierarchical. There were different ranks, and you had to fit your station. Okay, it also reinforces this idea that the king, the queen, was somehow seen as kind of more important than everyone else, and some kind of sort of holy figure. Okay, having this direct connection to God, being incredibly powerful, you couldn't question them. It's not like our queen now, who obviously doesn't really have a huge amount of power. She's more of a figurehead. In Elizabethan society, the monarch was chosen by God. All right, so then what they say goes. The other thing that this image can tell us, of course, is, well, given that it has God on it, clearly it's a pretty religious society, right? We can work that out. This is a society where religion, God, the devil, those are all real things that people really believe in, and therefore are going to be pretty important to them. All right? If you think that hell is a real place and that God is a real thing, that's going to impact your behaviour. You're going to behave in a way that's going to make sure you don't go and burn in hell in this horrible pit. You can see there's lots of torturing going on, which doesn't look like a lot of fun. So people in a pot there, someone's being stretched over here. Hell is not somewhere you want to go. Right? So if you live in a religious society, hell is going to be something you are doing your damnedest to avoid, which means that's really going to impact on your behaviour. And that's going to be a huge part of our course. Okay, the way people behave to try and, fit what they think their religion wants them to do, to try and behave like God wants them to. That has a huge impact on what people do. All right, so that's really important to remember. They really believe in this. Okay, so just a little bit of discussion then. I'm just going to talk you through some key concepts before you go away and do a little bit of work on your own to find out a few more things. So as I say, Elizabethan England is really hierarchical. Okay, and I've given you a couple of templates that you can use to kind of copy this down, or if you would like to just use a ruler and draw out your pyramid yourself, that is fine. So, you'll remember, as I say, from year 7, the feudal system went king, barons, knights, peasants. We're now in this sort of the 1500s, the 16th century, and you're also doing GCSE, which means we can make that a little bit more complicated. We can actually make it a little bit more detailed, a little bit more accurate. So, the pyramid in Elizabethan England looks like this. At the top, you've got the monarch. Well, obviously, God is up here off the screen somewhere. The monarch is at the top, the most important figure. Below them, you've got your nobility, your nobles. So that's your lords, your ladies, your earls, your dukes, the really top people in society. And obviously that's a hereditary position, okay, predominantly. You inherit that from your family, being the earl of whatever, okay. Below that, we've got the gentry, so that's kind of like the knights, basically, the sir this, sir that. Okay, they're pretty big landowners, so they're doing all right for themselves. Below them, you've got the yeomen. Okay, so that, again, they own land, but less than the gentry, so they're kind of one below them. They probably don't have a title, so they won't be sir this or sir that, but they probably own a little bit of land. Below them, you've got the tenant farmers. So a tenant is somebody who rents. Okay, they rent where they live. So a tenant farmer is someone who doesn't own their own land. They have a farm, but it's not their farm. All right, they rent it off one of these guys, all right, possibly even them. All right, they rent it from someone above them. Okay, they rent that land. Below them, you've got the landless, so people that don't own anything. They don't even rent it. They have no land at all. Or the labouring poor. So these are the people that are going to be working on your farm. Okay, you rent your farm, you're a tenant farmer, and then you've got some labourers that come in and do all the donkey work for you on your farm. Maybe you pay them a little bit, but they don't actually own the land. At the very bottom, you've got the vagrants and the homeless. These are people that don't have a home at all. They may not have a job. They're effectively beggars. They move around. They have quite a difficult time. Now, this obviously seems pretty horrible that the society was so strictly divided. It's not the way things work now. You can kind of be whatever you want to be. But in those days, equality was not seen as important. All right, they didn't believe in equality. They didn't believe that everybody was equal. That would be nonsense. All right, as far as they're concerned, everyone does have a part to play. Everyone does have a status, a rank, and that isn't something you muck about with. All right, they see that as something that is natural. You have to have your rank. Now, this is really important for keeping things moving because they don't actually have a police force. They don't have any police. They don't have any army. Permanent army anyway. If they need an army, they raise something called a militia, which is when you raise kind of the local people to come and fight for you. But there isn't a police force going around, checking everyone's behaving themselves, checking for crimes, etc. So to keep everything going, to keep order, to keep your society functioning, everyone has to know their place. Everyone has to know their place. Everyone has to accept their place. Okay, so if you're a landless or labouring poor, tough, suck it up. That's what you do. Okay, don't decide that you want to become an earl because it's not gonna happen. All right, you have to know your place. You have to fulfil the responsibilities associated with your place, and as we said, respect those above you, help those below you. So if you were a noble, if you were a duke, you would be expected to help out the homeless. Maybe donate them some money, try and support them in some way. Similarly, if you were a homeless person, you would be expected to respect and obey those above you. Okay, and of course, the person who's above everybody is the monarch, so they have total power in this scenario. Now, as I said, and we saw this in the image, most people in England live and work in the countryside. Okay, about 90%. Okay, so it's really very much an agricultural, rural society. Okay, but there are a couple of towns. Okay, there are some towns, places like London. All right. Now, in the town, the hierarchy is a little bit different because obviously you don't have farmers in a town, so it works a little bit differently. So again, you've got another diagram just to add this in, unless you want to draw it out yourself. At the top of the hierarchy in a town is going to be your merchants, so the people that trade, buy and sell. You can get very, very wealthy doing that. Okay, below them you've got professionals, so sort of lawyers, clergy, so people that work for the church, doctors, teachers, all right, professional figures. They've had some training, they've been to university, they're well qualified. Okay, they're also probably going to be earning decent money. Below that, you've got business owners, so people that perhaps run a blacksmith shop or something like that. They run a carpenter shop. Below them, you've got craftsmen, skilled craftsmen, people that work for them, so they are a carpenter, etc. And then again, right down the bottom, you've got people that don't have a job or they're an unskilled worker. So they can go and sort of, do something that you don't need to be trained in order to do, so something a bit menial, or they just don't have a job at all. So a lot of these people are what we would consider nowadays to be middle class. Now, in the Elizabethan period, that wasn't really a thing, but as you can see, it was starting to become a thing. So you obviously got the upper class, the nobles, the wealthy figures. You've got the lower class, the farmers, the poor. And increasingly, you're getting a middle class too of these merchants, these professionals, these business owners. Okay, so that's how your society looks. Okay, now the big thing, this is really important, this is going to prove very important. The big thing that England produces, so the English economy, basically runs on wool. Okay, that's our big thing. Okay, 81% of our exports in 1563 are wool. So wool, if we're not sure, it comes from a sheep. Okay, you can see from this picture. So in England, we had a whole load of sheep. Most people that own farms would own sheep. Okay, and you shear your sheep, you get wool off them, and you can use that to make cloth, which you can then sell. Or you can just sell the wool without making it into cloth. All right, so those are your options, basically. Okay, those are the options you can use in order to make money. All right, wool is what we sell, and crucially, the main place where we sell our wool is to the Netherlands, so Holland, particularly Antwerp, which was a big town in the Netherlands. So that was the main place we exported our wool to make money. Okay, our wool and our cloth. All right, so you'll notice, just looking at this map, by the way, that it looks quite different to the maps that we might expect to see now. Okay, obviously there's a difference in terms of how things are divided up, and it's the big division really in this period is not communism or capitalism, as we saw in the Cold War. It's Protestant versus Catholic. Okay, which is something that we will come back to later on. Okay. So, what I'm going to ask you to do is, now I've given you a bit of background, okay, and we've had a little bit of a chat about the kind of the general things that were going on in Elizabethan England, what I'm going to ask you to do is complete a table to find out more about different parts of Elizabeth's government. Okay, so this is how the society worked. How did her government work? How was the country run? How was it ruled? Okay, so you're going to look at the different elements of that government. So that'll be obviously the monarch. It's going to be parliament as well, because there was a parliament. This is what the parliament looked like. As you can see, a little bit different to perhaps how it looks now. Okay, for one thing, the Queen is there. Who has power? What can everybody do? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to use the sources that I've attached to show my homework to complete that table. And what we'll probably do is next lesson we're going to go through it, or I'll go through it with you on a video. But what I want you to do is try and complete it in as much detail yourself now using those sources. Now you can either draw it out in your book if you've got a ruler, or you can just print off the table that I've made for you and do it in that. Or if you want, you can type in the table and then print that off. I don't really mind, but you need to somehow complete that table so it can be nicely, safely stored in your book. Okay, so again, if you just pause the video now, complete that table, and then start it up again for the final activity for today. Okay, guys. So the final thing, now you've done all that, and you've completed that table, you've talked about various things with me, is you're going to make a decision. And I'm going to ask you to. This is essentially, obviously, in lessons, what we used to do quite a lot is I would give you a post-it note. You would write an answer on the post-it note, and then you would stick it somewhere on the board along this line. Now, obviously, we can't do that because you're at home and we're all sort of separate. But what you can do is post it on Microsoft Teams. Okay, so that is what I'm going to ask you to do, to post this answer on Microsoft Teams, just so we can kind of have that discussion in a different way. Okay, and the answer I'm going to ask you to think about is this. So the statement is, as Queen, Elizabeth could do whatever she liked. How far do you agree? Okay, now the information you've just read in those sources can help you think about that. Okay, we've already said that the monarch has this divine right of kings. Okay, they are supposedly chosen by God, put on the throne by God, and therefore can do whatever they like. Okay, they can declare war, they can make peace, they can call Parliament, they can dissolve Parliament. That's really important. Parliament only meets when the monarch wants them to. All right, Parliament only meets sort of fairly few times. I think it's only something like 12 times the whole time Elizabeth is Queen. All right, they only meet when she wants them to. And if she gets fed up with them, she shuts them down and sends them all home. She dissolves them. Okay, so she has that power. She can agree or veto Parliament's laws. So if Parliament make a law, Elizabeth can agree to it, or she can veto it, or she can say, don't think so, and just say no, and Parliament can't do anything about that. And she also can grant titles, land, money, jobs, which is this system we have called patronage, which we'll talk about another time. But essentially, it's a way of basically making people be loyal to you. Because if you give them the title, i.e. you say, right, you, because I like you, you can be Duke of Cambridge. That person then owes that to you. All right, they owe their job to you, so they're going to be loyal. Okay, they're not going to betray you, because otherwise then they'll lose getting to be Duke of Cambridge. Why would they do that? So the Queen has that power. She can give people land, she can give people titles, to keep them on side. The problem is, okay, money. All right, so the Queen gets money coming in, but she needs something called extraordinary taxation, i.e. more taxes, needing for like a war or something like that. She needs to get Parliament to agree to it. Okay, that's the big but. Okay, so while she has all this power, if she wants more money, more taxes, Parliament have got to okay it. All right, which I'm sure you'll remember from year 8 when you did the Civil War, is a bit of a problem for monarchs. They don't really like having to ask Parliament for money, because then you have to do other things for them. They don't really like that. So that's a bit of a pain. Okay. But Elizabeth does still have a huge amount of power. So there are certain things as well that are something called royal prerogative, which means only the monarch can have a say on them. Okay, so things like foreign policy, who we go to war with, who we ally with, who she gets married to. Obviously, she's a woman, so that's seen as quite a big deal. She needs to get married, and succession, who comes next. All of those issues are royal prerogative powers, i.e., only the Queen is allowed to comment on those. The Parliament aren't allowed to sit there or in. Okay, so using all of that we've just discussed, plus what you've got in your table, plus everything else we've talked about, and I would like you to answer this question. So, as Queen, Elizabeth could do whatever she liked. How far do you agree? Okay, now, as ever, you're not going to be, well, probably you're not going to be hard and fast either end. You're not going to say, I strongly agree 100%. You're not going to say, I strongly disagree 100% either. You're going to be somewhere in the middle. All right, so you're going to be saying something like, I mostly agree, or I partially agree, or I agree to a limited extent, or something along those lines. And then I want you to obviously justify it using all of this evidence that you have gathered today. Okay, guys, I hope this video was a little bit helpful. I'm going to try and make them, as I say, for all of our lessons now, as much as possible. I would also like to get us having a discussion on Teams, maybe a little video lesson at some point. At some point in the next couple of weeks, obviously, we're going to be doing this for a while. But we'll see how the videos go, and we'll try and kind of upgrade as things move along. But for now, when you've done this, please post your answer on Teams so I can have a look. Okay, thank you very much. Drop me an email if you're stuck.